World Development Report 2014, Risk and Opportunity. Managing Risk for Development, Key Components of Risk Management, with Kyla Wethley, lead author, World Development Report 2014.
One of our first observations when preparing the World Development Report 2014 was that oftentimes measures that could be taken to prepare for risk are not taken. But before we move on to the discussion of how then to improve risk management, I think it's valuable to be clear about what we mean by effective risk management, and that's what I'll aim to cover in this video. I want to start by setting out a framework that helps to illustrate how risks evolve over time, what we call the risk chain. You can think of the realization of a risk as starting with a shock, a change in the world that may be negative, such as a natural disaster or financial crisis, or positive, such as a technological improvement or a resource boom. The impact of these shocks can be amplified or reduced depending on people's external environment, their internal conditions, and what risk management is in place. There can also be important feedback effects over time. So, for example, the outcomes of past shocks may affect the propensity for future shocks. I'll use an example to help illustrate some of these concepts. In May 2008, a very large earthquake hit the Sichuan province of China. So the question is, what factors influence the transmission from the initial shock, in this case an earthquake of magnitude 7.8 on the Richter scale, to the outcome, the unfortunate death of 69,000 people? Well, the external environment may play a role. This may have been a particularly densely populated region. People's internal conditions, their average age and health, may affect the outcomes. But also risk management plays a role. What preparation was in place? Had children practiced their evacuation routines in the event of an earthquake? And relatedly, what measures were in place to help facilitate a quick response following an earthquake? I think this framework is useful, particularly in how it shows how risk management can be central to the transmission of shocks and the impact that they have. The question really then is, what does effective risk management look like? In the report, we argue that risk management that is effective needs to combine capacity to prepare in advance with an ability to cope afterwards. Preparation includes knowledge, getting information on risk, but then using that information to make judgments, obtaining protection, measures to influence both the impact or probability of a shock, or obtaining insurance, measures to transfer resources from good to bad times or to those most in need in bad times. But not all shocks can or even should be prevented, so people also need to be able to cope afterwards. Coping actions could include updating knowledge and then using whatever other protection and insurance arrangements are in place. Again, I'd like to use an example. In this case, imagine a family that is considering moving to a new area in search of better jobs, but this area also is prone to malaria. The family could start by gaining knowledge, learning about the risk of malaria and how to treat it. They could get protection, for example, using a bed net to prevent being bitten by mosquitoes at night. They could obtain insurance, keeping some savings aside to pay for treatment if necessary, or getting public or private health insurance. And then if the risk does materialize and some members of the family become sick, they could cope. They could deploy their savings to get treatment or go to a public hospital, for example. Now, in earlier videos, you've already seen how the elements of risk management that can be taken in advance, preparation, are particularly important. To look at how preparation varies across countries, we tried to prepare an index of risk preparation for the report. To do so, we thought about the categories that are highly likely to affect people's capacity to prepare for and therefore also respond to shocks. There are physical and financial assets, their human capital, what support they receive from the state or the support they receive from the communities. And we combined indicators from across these categories to make an index. two very interesting findings emerge. The first is that risk preparation appears highly correlated with income. People are the most prepared on average in high-income countries, particularly in North America and Western Europe, and the least prepared in low-income countries, particularly in Africa. The second finding is about the variation that exists within regions, even with similar levels of income per capita. So, for example, Chile has reasonably good preparation for risk, but is neighbored by Argentina, which only has average preparation despite having a similar level of income per capita. Similarly, Ethiopia has better risk preparation than its low income per capita would seem to suggest. This led us to another question. If preparation is lower on average in low-income countries, is that just because risk management is too expensive? To help answer that question, we looked at a large number of studies that examine how the benefits of risk management compare to its costs. And across different categories of risk, we find that the benefits of risk management exceed the costs, sometimes overwhelmingly so. The benefits of paying in advance for preparation exceed the costs of paying for damages afterwards, often multiple times. Now, to say that risk management is cost-effective does not necessarily mean that governments have the resources up front to pay for those preparatory programs. However, I do think that the overwhelming evidence on the cost-effectiveness of risk management, alongside the fact that we do see effective preparation in some low-income countries, does suggest that lack of resources cannot be a sufficient explanation for preparation that is lacking. Indeed, in the report, we discuss a number of obstacles beyond lack of resources that often impair risk management, and these will be the topic of future videos in the course.